Hi guys, so in this video I will be explaining client round questions which are asked most commonly in client round interviews. Okay, so in this we'll be focusing more on the framework based questions which are asked by clients. So in my previous part one, you can just go to the previous video in the series. You can go through what all coding based questions that can be asked. That too, few of them I have put up. So in this video I will be solely focused upon Spring Boot based questions that are most commonly asked, and few core Java questions also I will touch. Okay, so let's see what all types of questions are most commonly asked. So in each videos, basically I'm covering 10 to 12 questions so that you will not get overburdened or over pressurized like these much thing we have to complete. No, it's not like that. Just 10 to 12 questions every day. If you go, you will be prepared in next 15 to 20 days. Okay, so let's understand the questions asked. So this is one of the questions that are asked in client round. So the question is, we have to explain circular dependency. So what is basically circular dependency? So circular dependency means, so there is one of the component or one of the Spring managed bean component that Spring container manages. Okay, and within that we are providing or we are auto wiring different service. Okay, let's suppose service A is one of the Spring managed bean, and within that we are auto wiring service B. And within service B, which is also one of the component, there we are managing service A. Okay, we are auto wiring service A. So what will happen in this scenario? So at the runtime, when Spring container will try to inject a dependency of service B in service A, then what will happen? Internally, it will search for any Spring managed component for service B present or not for dependency. Okay, so it will find out like, yes, service B is present, it is at the component. Okay, so it is ready for getting dependency injected by the container. So within service B, there again we are auto wiring service A. So for service A, it requires service B to get auto wired or injected, and for injecting service B, it requires injection of service A. So it internally locks within themselves, and it will run in an infinite loop kind of thing, and it will be a stack overflow. So this is specifically creates a tight coupling between the beans. So this thing needs to be avoided in actual Spring Boot application, and this type of exceptions might come while executing Spring Boot application, like there is a dependency or circular dependency between the references or the beans. So these type of exceptions you will get when you execute or start up the server. So this needs to be avoided so that you don't get these type of errors, and it should not create any interdependency kind of thing. Either it needs to be resolved by properly creating a dependency in such a way that both one or more than one services should not depend upon each other. Okay, and we should not create a dependency via different bean creation mechanism also. So in later stages we will be discussing what are ways to initialize the beans as well. Okay, but normally we have to remember, like, we should not create this circular dependency. Okay, because it creates a tight coupling and it leads to stack overflow error. So this is also one of the questions that are most commonly asked in interviews. Second question is, what's the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? So differences can be in anything like REST API or REST web services. What's the difference? Okay, so request param, query param, what's the difference? Okay, so one is from REST web services, another is from JAX RS. So those are the things that we have to understand. And similarly, difference between Spring Framework and Spring Boot. So these are some of the differences that you may go through. So definition wise, it's Spring Framework is a comprehensive framework for building enterprise Java application like AOP, data access, or web MVC layers. For Spring Boot, it is built on top of this Spring framework. Okay, so initially, long time back, we used to work on Spring framework or Spring MVC. That time, at that point of time, everything was XML based. Bean creation also we need to write it in the XML files. Specifically bean.xml file we need to create, and there we have to create the bean with bean ID. Bean ID equal to the name of that bean ID, and then name also we have to provide. So those dependency of beans needs to get created in XMLs during that time. So now what is happening, everything is auto wired. Okay, auto configuration feature is there in Spring Boot, as you all know. So with just @auto wired, you can add the bean which you want to inject in a class. Okay, and then automatically when you start up the server, Spring container will inject that dependency onto that bean, onto that class. So this is the way which we need to understand how Spring Boot works, and it removes all the boilerplate code. So if you see in Spring Framework, there are a lot of dependency or configuration related stuffs we have to do. Okay, either in pom.xml we have to do configurations. In Tomcat also we need to add configurations. Bean.xml configurations we need to add. So there are a lot of configuration, lot of time gets wasted there. But in Spring Boot, it comes up with auto configuration feature, and it reduces all the boilerplate code. So this is the major advantage. Okay, and with respect to setup, it requires a lot of manual setup, as I already told you. For Spring Boot, it comes with auto configuration or embedded server. Okay, so Tomcat server is embedded in Spring Boot, which is not there in Spring Framework. For configuration purpose, it traditionally uses XML or Java based configuration. Okay, but now in Spring Boot, it uses auto configuration plus some starter dependency are there, like Spring Boot starter web. It will take care of all the configuration related stuff. You don't need to think about like how to make the configurations possible. Those things, those headaches will be taken care of by Spring Container in Spring Boot. Dependency wise, developer needs to add all the dependencies manually. For example, for Spring MVC, we need to add Jackson, validator, servlet API. Those are things dependency we need to add manually. But with respect to Spring Boot, it's provided starter POMs like Spring Boot starter data JPA. If you remember, Spring Boot starter test. Okay, so these are some of the starter dependencies that it's added automatically. Spring Boot starter web. So these all are starter dependency which automatically includes the dependencies. We don't have to create any dependencies manually. So this is the major advantage of using Spring Boot. Server wise, Spring Framework needs external server like Tomcat, Jetty. It requires to embed external server, and we need to configure that Tomcat server explicitly. But for Spring Boot, it's automatically embedded into that. If you want to exclude, then within that exclusion tag, you need to add Tomcat. And if you want to add Jetty, you can put it in another tag like include tag, and within that you need to add your own server which you want to add it in your application. Deployment wise, Spring Framework is usually packaged as a web archive file or WAR file, and is deployed on the application server. But for Spring Boot, it's packaged as a self-contained jar. It's a separate identity jar which is created, which is independently deployable first of all, and it can be run via java-jar, and we have to pass that application name .jar. So this is the command. If you run it at during command line arguments, if you pass, then automatically you will see it will execute all the codes or all the execution based things written within that jar file. Okay, so we don't have to write any setups. We don't have to do any setup. We don't have to configure anything. Just we have to pass in command line java-jar that application name.jar. It will be executing all the jar files. So this is the advantage of Spring Boot. I hope you got the clarity on this. So this was for difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Now advantages. So difference is also important and advantage is also important. So everything comes up with some of the pros and cons. So for Spring Boot also there is some advantages and there is some disadvantages. So advantages, as we all know, it's a rapid application development. It will give you production ready application in an instant. Okay, it will not take much time. Okay, within 5 to 10 minutes you can create a ready-made, robust and production ready application. It totally depends like what all type of implementation of functionalities you are implementing, but if it is very small, it will not take much time because configuration is not taking much time. Okay, everything you have to focus upon, every time you need to focus upon what? Your business functionality. The rest all things Spring Container will take care of. First important thing. Second, embedded server. As I already told you, it has embedded Tomcat server. Auto configuration feature is there. Microservice ready application, it's there. Okay, so each and every services can be built and deployed independently without having to depend upon each other. Yes, for communicating purpose, we can make two services communicate, but that is later stage. That is totally optional. It's not tight coupling. It's not like we have to do. It's like optional. If we want, we can do. That means all services are independently deployable. That is very important. Then production ready features we are having, like it includes actuator, which does the monitoring and health check. Okay, whether your bean is working perfectly fine or not. So that we can do it via actuator. Then monitoring, logging, those features are present. Then it has reduced XML configuration. That XML part can also be added and it may be removed. It totally depends upon you. If you want to do via auto configuration feature, that also you can do. If you want to add via XML, that also you can do. It's totally up to you basically. Okay, then Spring ecosystem, there is a kind of big ecosystem Spring is provided to us. Like it works seamlessly with Spring security. If you want to implement your own security like JWT, Okta, OAuth type of configuration that you want to add in your application, that you can seamlessly add, it's similar to like Google ecosystem. Google has its own ecosystem, right? You can see Google Drive is there, then Google Photos is there. Okay, then Google OneDrive is there. Okay, Google backup facilities is there, then Play Store. Okay, so these all things, Google Play services, okay, Google Games, Google see YouTube. What are all these? This is the ecosystem which Google has created around themselves, and one of the main thing is Google search engine. So the ecosystem is created in such a way that you can't go out of the Google's world. Okay, have you made any thought of it, like should I search in yahoo.com? Should I search something in Yahoo mail engine? Not, no, right? Because Google has seamlessly provided all the features, making it all customer flexible so that we don't have to go outside Google. So that type of ecosystem Spring has provided to us. It works seamlessly, whatever application you are writing. If you want to integrate some security, if you want to integrate cloud native application feature, if you want to integrate Spring Batch or JPA, it is very much easy with Spring Boot. Okay, so these are some of the advantages with Spring Boot. If we see with respect to disadvantage, it has less control over configuration. So if I'm doing auto configuration, and if there are a lot of configuration files that needs to be added, so it may lead to complexity if there are more number of jars that needs to be auto configured. Okay, so that, because at that point of time you need fine grained configuration, it requires fine grained customization of your jars which needs to be added. So if it is like fewer jars, it's fine. But in later stage, if more and more number of jars that keep on getting added, then also it will work. But it will increase the complexity of your application. So that also we have to think upon. Second is larger jar size. So it packages all the things like embedded server, all its dependencies once you add the pom.xml. So once if you see the libraries at the left hand side of your application, you will see a lot of jars coming. So as soon as you add any dependency, it will add all the corresponding jars linked with that dependencies in the POM file. So it will become very much heavily loaded. So that it increases the headache of the jar file. So jar file size will increase. So managing it sometimes becomes difficult. Third, performance overhead. As you all know, auto configuration feature sometimes loads unused bean, which we don't want. So that also we can handle, but it sometimes load unused beans, so we need to handle it explicitly, so it increases the memory and the startup time as well. Then learning curve for beginners also, it's a very important thing. So all the complexity, it's hidden, you can't see that. But once a learner, a newbie is coming, or a fresher is coming to understand Spring Boot, it becomes little challenging for them to understand the rules, like what is IOC, what is dependency injection, how this MVC design pattern works, how debugging is working when multiple services are communicating with each other. So these type of things becomes very much difficult for a freshers. If you have some years of experience, it becomes easy for you, but initial phase it's very difficult. Okay, then some version compatibility issues might come, like let's suppose some jar have a older version and other service jar have a latest version, so it may show like class not found exception. So these kind of things may be happening when there is some version mismatch between the jars. So version compatibility issue might come if you need to manage different versions, so it can cause conflict as well. So, and it is not ideal for monolithic applications. Okay, so Spring Boot application is best suited for microservices. Why? Because here the Spring Boot is defined in such a way that all the applications having multiple functionalities can be divided across multiple services. So if we are doing monolithic application, then all the functionalities you're trying to add it. So if it is like a small application, very small application, then you can make use of Java only. Okay, or you can make use of any standalone E2E application. So Spring Boot is not required in that scenarios, because Spring Boot comes with a lot of hidden complexities. Okay, but if it is a very large application with a lot of functionalities, then it's an ideal case. So specifically while using microservice based applications where there are multiple services which needs to get communicated with each other, in that scenario Spring Boot is preferred. So I hope you got a clarity like what's a major advantage and disadvantages of using Spring Boot application. Next, we have to design our own online book purchase application. So how can we design our own online book purchase application? So this is basically with respect to system design. So first of all, we need to identify what are functional requirement, what are non-functional requirements, which database we have to choose, how can we make it scalable, so that if the particular startup or particular system is scaled to millions of users, then how concurrently multiple user can book for their own purchase. Okay, so let's suppose it has been put online and parallelly 100 users are trying to access and purchase the same book. So how can we access that? How can we give the authenticity, like which particular user needs to get the book purchased first? So it totally depends upon first come first serve basis, right? So those are things also we need to take care of. And finally, how to create controller classes. Which all classes needs to be created at the entity level first, so that you can create a mapping. So first of all, book purchase. So what all things are coming under book purchase? So it can be with respect to library, or it can be with respect to some fair. Okay, in a book fair you are going and you are trying to buy a book or purchase book from there. So first of all, what they will do, they will allow you to come inside, you will go there, you will try to search like which book you want to purchase, then you will select a book, then that people who is there in the counter, he will do the billing and you will pay for that book, then the number of books will be reduced by one and you will get that book. This is with respect to offline purchase. When you are doing online purchase, what will happen, then concurrency will come. In offline purchase, if there is only one place where all books are being found, so there synchronously work is happening, because one by one only people is coming and booking their purchase. Okay, but if it is online, then parallelly like multiple people are trying to purchase that particular book. So in that scenario, we have to maintain the concurrency, we have to maintain the synchronization between the locks, so that all the people, those who are trying to access the lock on that particular book, so lock means those people who has clicked on payment button, like I want to purchase this book, so that particular person needs to get locked, so that no other thread or no other person is trying to acquire or trying to set that lock or trying to purchase it, because books are limited, right? Let's suppose only 10 books are present and 100 users are trying to buy it. So how will it be accessible for them? It's not possible, right? So that person who has come first to buy, so that person will lock that resource, and once that purchase is successful or failed, once the transaction process is completed, then second user will come. So here there is a transaction management system also we have to think about, like how will you roll back the transaction. So there we have to think about saga distribution. Okay, so it's distributed microservice architecture we have to think about, like saga design pattern in microservice. So if like entire service flow is completed or none of the services are completed, so what does that mean? So if any user is or customer is trying to purchase a book, so there can be two scenarios. Once the purchase is successful, the money is there in his bank account, in his or her bank account, and then the book has been given to him or her. But if money is not there in bank account, then what should happen? Every process should get rolled back. The number of count of that particular book should be reset to what was there before. So those all things needs to get handled. Basically, atomicity of that particular transaction needs to be maintained if multiple threads or multiple customers are trying to purchase that same book. So these are the things that we have to take care of. So locking mechanism we have to understand. So there is like multiple things in locking, like read write lock, reintrant lock mechanism. Those all things also we need to keep in mind, like which locking mechanism we need to move ahead with, depending upon how many books are there. So if one person has already purchased a book, the counter should be reduced by one. Like previously 20 books were there, now only 19 book. Then second person has bought, then 18 book, then 17 book, then 16 book. So 100 people are there in line to buy that book asynchronously. Okay, but lock is being acquired only by one. So as soon as 50 or 20 people has already bought it, so now it will show that book is sold out. So these kind of features needs to be implemented. And then next is how can you make it scalable? So we need to make use of distributed architecture first of all, so that it maintains the event driven architecture. Like if success is entire event driven architecture, like one of the part, if it is failed, entire thing will get rolled back, or success, entire thing will become success. So this thing needs to be implemented. Then second is it needs to make it highly available so that your server doesn't get down. It may be a scenario like multiple users are trying to access your book and it may get down, server may get down, or it may get crash. So that also needs to be handled in your particular project or in your particular application when you are trying to design that system. And next is what database will you choose? So here it's a book, and book is to be bought by customers. So there can be lot of columns. So here we have to make use of horizontal scaling, okay, because there can be multiple servers and there can be n number of books, and n books can be there in n m languages. So that also needs to be taken care of. So horizontal scaling needs to be implemented. Then it needs to be made highly scalable and available. Then API gateway needs to be implemented for security purpose. Then which security we need to implement, like JWT or Okta or OAuth application. Then if there is some failure in the entire process, then how will you do centralized logging mechanism via Jipkins or Sleuth? So there we have to implement trace ID and span ID. So span ID needs to be spread across multiple services. Okay, so there will be for each service there will be separate span IDs, and entire services will be starting from start till end. There will be a trace ID, and thereby you can understand like where exactly is the issue to handle any logging features. Okay, if you want to log any issue or you want to debug it, so that way you have to implement Sleuth or Jipkins part, and we need to deploy it onto a cloud server. Okay, so AWS you can make use of. So what all things like you can implement over there, like AWS Lambda you can implement, okay, to put up all your serverless computer architectures. So those all things we need to implement. And at the end, your MVC pattern, which what all controller class, what all requests it needs to be there, and then what all services, business logic, then which repository will choose, like CRUD repository, paging and sorting repository, or JPA repository, what all DB related things we will do. Then indexing, how will you do indexing so that fetch operation becomes faster? So these all things needs to be taken care of. Then you will be able to understand like how can you design the entire system. I hope you got the clarity. So if you want, I will create a separate dedicated video on this. Just comment it down below. I will create a separate video on the system design for this part. I've just given a brief overview so that you will get the idea of it, like exactly blueprint, like step by step, how can we implement. Let's jump on to next question. So next question is like how transaction management and transaction propagation works in Spring Boot application. So this is very common and very important from interview perspective. There are some other things also like isolation level, propagation levels in Hibernate. Those are also very important. Then after that, transaction management also comes. So transaction management, why it is important? So before understanding that, first to understand like what is transaction. So whenever you are doing any kind of transaction or buying something online, what do you expect? Like once you do the payment, then that particular item needs to be ordered with a particular order ID, and that order needs to be delivered at your home address or whatever address you have given. That is the actual definition of transaction, and that is the only thing which you want. But what if some issue comes while doing a transaction? Says there is some failure or payment happened, but the order ID is not generated. So this is very frustrating, right? So this also you don't like. If some issue occurred from their side, from server, from your side payment is successful, money got debited, but the order ID is not generated, or it has not been delivered to your address for a very long time. Any issue might come. So in that scenario, transaction management comes into picture. So what will happen? There's segregated systems that is there. Like first of all, order management system, if I consider. So what will happen? First of all, you will be choosing like which particular product you want to buy. So let's suppose you want to buy laptop or mobile phone. You have selected that particular laptop from your Amazon website. Okay. Now what is the next step? Next step is to add it into a cart. After adding into the cart, that is successful. Next step is going ahead with a purchase. you have clicked on the payment option, then it will show you like these are all the modes of payment, which one you want to select. You have chosen UPI based payment, you have selected that. Then after that, what will happen if payment, you have tried to do the payment, you have put the OTP, but payment got failed due to any reason, then whatever events happened before, that should get rolled back. Okay, that is the atomicity feature. Basically, if one of the event has failed, then entire previous system needs to get rolled back to previous state. Okay, so that is where transaction management comes into picture. Okay, so in this scenario, there is some annotation we have to understand, like at the transactional annotation that is there at the top of class or at the top of method. So once you write at the transactional there, then we need to we are making sure that Spring container is making the transactional rollback when there is some issue with that particular transaction, when there is interaction with the database. Okay, so let's suppose one of the thread is trying to acquire the database and it's trying to fetch the data. Okay, so in that scenario, if some issue occurs, that means fetching is having some issue. So if no data is being fetched, then rest of the operations should get paused, so that next set of operations should not move ahead. So in that scenario, it should get rolled back to previous state. Or if we are trying to save the data in database for a particular ID and that ID is not present, then it should throw the exception and entire set of events should get rolled back. So these are the some scenarios where exactly transaction management comes into picture. And there are various ways to do the transaction management. Like we can add a transaction over a method where one method is calling another method, so that will also become added transactional. And if you put it over a class, the entire set of methods present within that class will become transactional. Okay, then within that added transactional, there can be multiple parameters you can pass, like rollback for, there is exception.class you can add, or you can add some isolation levels like read committed, read uncommitted, so that you don't have phantom reads. So if you want video on this things, isolation propagation level, do comment it out. I will create a separate video on this. Then there is some propagation levels. So those all things we need to manage it explicitly. Okay, so these are some of the gist of the transaction management. I can't tell explicitly everything, otherwise this video will become very long. So till this point, I can explain you like these are the topics that interviewer is expecting from you. Okay, next question. If I don't want to save the child class object when saving parent class object, then what we should do in Hibernate? So if we know like Hibernate mapping is what by default, Hibernate mapping is by default eager loaded. Okay, so whenever you are doing Hibernate mapping, so in that scenario, automatically it will load all the entities while doing the server startup. And if you want to make it lazy loaded, so let's suppose I want to fetch the data, there is parent and child relationship. First of all, we need to understand. So let's suppose there is a classroom. Okay, in a classroom there are n students or 60 students. So there is a relation between classroom and student as one to many relationship. One classroom is having many students. So I want that if I am saving classroom data in database, then children data or students data should not get stored in database. Okay, so let's suppose a new classroom has come up. So if that classroom I'm saving in database, then all the student related details should not get saved in database. Then what we should do in that scenario? So in that scenario, either we don't write cascade equal to cascade.all, or if I am writing, then which one you will choose? You can see there are 4 types of cascade which are given by Hibernate. One is persist. Persist means if parent is getting saved, then children also get saved. Merge. Updating parent also updates children. Remove. Deleting parent also deletes children. And all, it will do all of the above, anything you want to do. Okay, so if I want that save does not happen, then you can choose either merge or remove. If you choose either merge or remove, then if you are saving parent, then child class objects will not get saved in DB basically. Okay, because persist is specifically for saving, and I have written merge. Okay, then while doing the updation of parent class, then only it will update the child class. Okay, if I'm not updating parent, just saving I'm doing, then it will not save the child class. So these things needs to be handled explicitly. So if I'm passing persist, then only it will save, or else it will not save. But if you're trying to update parent class, it will make sure that it is updating the child class entity as well. So these are the difference that we have to understand. And if I'm not doing any cascading, if I'm not writing cascade equal to cascade type dot all, then Hibernate won't touch the children automatically. So it is by default eager loaded. And if I'm writing fetch type dot lazy explicitly, then while fetching the data from database, when I'm trying to fetch the parent, then child class data will not get fetched. Only parent class data I will be able to see. So these two things we have to understand. Like, how can we make sure, like, if I'm fetching parent class data, child class data should not get fetched. Then we have to make use of fetch equal to fetch type dot lazy. If you want to fetch, then you don't have to write anything, because by default it's eager type. Okay. If I want to save data of the child, if I'm saving parent, then use cascade equal to cascade type dot persist. Or if you want to do all of the operations, use cascade type dot all. And if you don't want to persist child class objects when you are saving parent class object, then you can make use of either merge or remove, but don't use persist and all. I hope you got that clarity on this. So these are most commonly asked, so you should prepare on that. And along with that, you comment it down, like, what is a proxy object? Okay, because this has been asked to me in the recent interview. So prepare on that and comment it down below, like, what is a proxy object and what's the importance of that. Okay, so let's understand next question. How the Spring Boot application starts? This is also like frequently asked questions in interviews, even to 8+ years candidate, starting from 2+ years candidate. It is most commonly asked. Okay, because this is the root of the framework. How Spring Boot application starts. So first of all, we need to understand, like, as soon as you are running up a server, what will happen? Server is up, Tomcat server is up, then it is started on port 8080, then automatically what will happen? Initialization of bean will happen. So initialization of bean is happening via multiple way. Either it can be done via XML with bean ID, bean name, those things, or you can do it via application context. Okay, so bean initialization can be happened by multiple ways, like auto wiring by Spring Container, or with bean ID, bean name in XML files. Or if you don't want to go ahead with these two, you can go ahead with application context. So there can be like configurable application context or normal application context. So by default, we have to go ahead with configurable application context reference equal to new configuration applicable context. Okay, so there is something called as application context, which is a child of this configurable application context. So we have to provide the reference. Similarly, like application context reference equal to new class path XML application context. So this is one of the way to initialize the application context. Okay, and when we are getting the bean, like application context reference, from this reference I am getting the bean. So when I'm trying to get the bean and pass the bean name, it will inject that particular bean into your class. So this is also one of the way. There are multiple ways, 3 to 4 ways of injecting beans while doing the server startup. Another way is through post construct. Okay, there is pre-construct, there is post-construct, there is init method. These all things are very much important for understanding purpose. And then after that, once the beans initialization process starts, then it starts with @Spring Boot application, which is the starting point. Okay, of as soon as you hit the particular endpoint, it first goes to @Spring Boot application to understand, like, which all are Spring managed beans, or there will be component which understands or give information or signal to Spring Container, like which all are the beans which will be managed, do the auto dependency injection at runtime. So once component, it's a stereotype. Okay, so once it finds out all the component based annotation, this stereotype annotation like controller, service, repository, it will do the dependency injection on that classes of beans. But this is the way, like, how Spring Boot application starts. Internally, there are a lot of things happening, like front end dispatcher servlet is there. From there, it redirects the user from API gateway. There is something called as API gateway, which routes the application of the client to the specified instance of the endpoint for that particular microservice, depending upon which instance is not that much busy. Okay, so during server, when the beans are loaded, at that point of time, it generally finds out, like, which instances are not that busy, which instances are less loaded. So API gateway will route that request to that particular instance. for that endpoint microservice. So this is the way basically internally thing works. Next, what if we don't want to inject some of the beans at server startup? So how can we make sure like uh, if some of the beans are not required? So first of all, there is multiple thing we need to understand over here. So first of all, there is like if I am trying to configure our own bean, so we have to make the class as configurable class with @configuration. Okay, then the method within that needs to be @bean annotated. So it will make sure that you are creating your own custom bean. Okay, so within that there is one conditional on property. Okay, and within that conditional on property you can add some of the name, like what is the name of the bean on which you want to add that condition, and then you have to pass that. So within that you can have having value, so having value as false. So there is true and false, these two things are there. So if you pass having value as false, so it will make sure like this particular bean at runtime will not get injected by Spring Container. This indication Spring Container will get like when you are trying to inject the bean at runtime when server is getting started, and these beans should not get initialized, okay, while doing the injection. So these particular beans will be removed or revoked basically, for which the custom bean created is having value as false. I hope you got the clarity. If you have created your own custom beans, so then you will get the idea on it. Or else you just Google it out, like how can you create your own custom beans. Okay, so there is added configuration class and bean methods will be there, added bean, then there will be added conditional on property. So these are some of the annotations that you have to go ahead with. Okay, I hope you got some clarity on it. So these are some of the questions on Spring Boot. So now let's understand one or two Java based questions, like what's the importance of final keyword at field level. Okay, so if I am making any field as final, then we can't change that field. Okay, so we can't access that field basically because that field is final. So once that field is final, we can't modify that particular field. Okay, so this is very much crucial. So this is being used during the immutability. So in immutability, all the fields are created as private and final, so that we can't modify that particular field, and that can be accessible via deep copy. Okay, so once you do the deep copy, every time new instance is getting created, so the constructor is initialized with new fields every time it is called. So this is the way we make use of final keyword. So whenever we have to make sure like we don't have to modify the existing data which is being set first time, that way you have to make the keyword as final. Then if I'm adding final at a method level, then what will happen? If I'm adding at a class level, then what will happen? So if I'm adding final at class level, then it will make sure like that particular class is not inherited. Okay, we can't inherit and extend its property if the class is final. If method is final, then that particular method can't be overridden into the subclass because that particular method is locked. Okay, and once that method is locked, we can't override into our own subclass. So these are some of the important features of final. And one of the another question which is variation of this is final, finally, and finalize. What's the difference between them? I hope you all know about this. It's a very basic level questions. So these are some of the important questions on final keyword. Okay. Then can you override final and private method? Is it possible? No. Final methods you can't override because I just now told like you can't basically override that method if that particular method is final. Okay, so it is not accessible, so it can't be subclassed. That particular method we can't use it in our subclass, so that's why we can't override final method, and we can't override private methods also because private method is particular to us, that particular class. Okay, so if I'm trying to override, that means you're trying to access that particular method in a separate class, and we all know that private fields and methods are scoped to that particular class only. It's encapsulated for that particular class. It cannot be accessed outside that class. So that's why we can't override final and private methods. So these are some of the client-based questions which are most commonly asked. So this is part 2. I will create subsequent series. If you have not seen the previous parts, you can go through the playlist and go and understand all the previous questions that has been discussed. So we'll discuss next set of questions in my next video, upcoming video. Till then, it's Devjit Roy signing off. Bye bye. Hi everybody. I provide consultation calls or one-on-one session calls or one-on-one mock interview sessions for all of you so that you can ace ahead in your IT interviews, okay, and crack the big service based and or big product based organization. So how can you do that? So I am taking mock interview sessions, so you can go ahead in the description box below, book a call with me, okay, one-on-one session call, and we'll be having a one-on-one conversation.